Hello, 7th grade ELA student. This is Miss Tolman helping out Miss Blair with reading through the units for you. We are on our Unit 3, Reading for Fun. Woohoo! We are on our Lesson 3, Characteristics of Literary Works, How an Author Crafts a Story. We do have some vocabulary, so it is a good idea that you have your notebook out handy, ready to go, so that you can write down this vocabulary, and it will help your brain to better remember it later on. We have quite a few today. So it starts with conflict is the problem in a story. Figurative language is words and expressions that are not meant to be taken literally. First person point of view, it's a character in the story that is the narrator and uses the pronoun I to refer to himself or herself. Imagery, it's the details that appeal to the senses of smell, sight, hearing, taste, and touch. Mood, it's the feeling created by a story. Motivation is the reason behind the character's behavior. Plot is the series of events from beginning of a story to the end. Point of view is the perspective from which a story is told. Setting is the time and place of a story. Third person, limited point of view. The narrator reveals the thoughts and feelings of only one character. Third person, omniscient point of view. The narrator knows and reveals all the thoughts and feelings of each character in the story. And voice. The way an author uses language to express himself or herself, and the style. Lesson 1. In Lesson 1, you learn the importance of being an active reader by connecting with the text and making inferences. Another important part of understanding the story is considering the literary elements of the story. Considering the literary elements the story displays, and how they work together to drive the story along. In this lesson, we will review these literary elements and explain the effect that they have on a work of literature. Starting with plot. The plot of a story is a series of events from the beginning of the story to the end. The plot includes the problem, or conflict in a story, and how that conflict is resolved. At the beginning of a story, the reader learns the basic situation of the story. Then the conflict is introduced. The complications of the story, new problems related to the conflict, keep the reader involved in the story. In the most exciting part of the story, called the climax, an event happens that will determine the outcome of the story or the resolution. The conflict of the story can be internal or external or both. When a character struggles against another character, nature, or society, the conflict is external. When a character struggles against his or her desires or emotions, the conflict is internal. An example of an internal conflict is one in which a character is faced with a difficult decision, such as whether or not to tell the truth. Another element is setting. So many elements contribute to the plot of a story. One of these is the setting, the time and place of a story. For example, a story that involves a car chase down a darkened alley would have a much different outcome if the chase took place on an icy bridge. Settings can contribute to the conflict of a story. For a story that's set in the South during the time period of the Civil War, the conflict would probably be related to the issue of slavery. The setting of a story can also reveal details about the character. For example, a character may be very lively and outgoing at school, but sullen and moody at home. The different settings show different sides of a character. Authors use the setting of a story to give the story a certain mood or feeling. For example, a mystery story set in an abandoned house on a dark and stormy night would have an eerie, frightening mood. In contrast, a story set at a carnival in broad daylight would cause the reader to feel more lighthearted. Characters. As you read about a character in a story, you should ask, why did the character do this? Why did he say this? The answers to these questions will give you the character's motivation, or the reason behind his or her behavior. You can make inferences based on details given in the story to determine the character's motivation. A character's motivation can be influenced by many factors, including the setting, events of the plot, and the character's reactions. Similarly, a character's motivation can cause him or her to make decisions that drive the plot along. Point of view. The point of view of a story is the perspective from which the story is told. A story can be told from the point of view of a character in the story or an outside narrator who is not part of the story. The person telling the story is the one who reveals the most information about the story to the reader. A writer intentionally chooses a point of view based on how much he or she wants the reader to know. The three types of point of view are first person, third person omniscient, and third person limited, and each point of view reveals a different side of the story. In stories told in the first person point of view, a character in the story is the narrator. The character refers to himself or herself as I, and the reader views the story from the character's perspective. The first person point of view allows the reader to feel almost as if he or she is part of the story. As the reader, you can see what the main character sees or hear what the main character hears, and know what the main character knows. In contrast with the first person point of view, the third person narrator is not a character in the story. The story is told in third person. The narrator will use pronouns such as he, she, and they to refer to the characters. Sometimes the narrator knows and tells about the characters, their thoughts, and motivations. In other cases, however, the narrator only knows and tells about one of the characters in the story, usually the main character. The third person omniscient point of view allows the reader to see the whole story, including the thoughts and feelings of each character. The story is told by an outside narrator, not a character in the story. This narrator is omniscient, or all-knowing, and he tells the reader as much information as the writer allows. Sometimes the omniscient narrator only reveals the thoughts and feelings of a few characters in the story. Often the omniscient narrator comments on the characters and events of the story. Similar to the omniscient point of view, a story told in the third person limited point of view is told by a narrator rather than a character in the story. This narrator, however, is limited in his knowledge of the character's thoughts and feelings and tells the story from only one character's point of view. Unlike first person point of view, third person pronouns are used to refer to all characters. The reader sees the actions and events of the story as they relate to one main character, and the narrator reveals the thoughts and feelings of only that one character. Now we will look at a few examples of how writers use point of view to reveal the story to a reader. The Adventures of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, both written by Mark Twain, showed two different viewpoints. Read the following excerpts and try to decide which point of view each story is told. From The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. Tom! No answer. Tom! No answer. What's gone with that boy, I wonder? You, Tom? No answer. The old lady pulled her spectacles down and looked over them about the room. She then put them up and looked out under them. She seldom or never looked through them for such a small thing as a boy. They were her state pair, the pride of her heart, and they were built for style, not service. She could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well. She looked perplexed for a moment, and then said, not fiercely, but still loud enough for the furniture to hear, "Well, if I get a hold of you, I'll—" She did not finish, for by this time she was bending down and punching under the bed with a broom, so she needed to breathe to punctuate the punches with. She resurrected nothing but the cat. "I never did see a beat of that boy." She went through the open door and stood in it and looked out among the tomato vines and jimson weeds that constituted the garden. "No, Tom." She lifted up her voice at the angle and calculated for distance and shouted, "You, Tom!" There was a slight noise behind her, and she turned just in time to seize the small boy by the slack of his roundabout and arrest his flight. "There! I might have thought that closet. What you been doing in there?" "Nothing." "Nothing? Look at your hands. Look at your mouth. What is that truck?" "I don't know, Aunt." "Well, I know. It's jam is what it is. 40 times I've said if you didn't let that jam alone, I'd skin you. Hand me that switch." The switch hovered in the air, and the peril was desperate. "My! Look behind you, Aunt!" The old lady whirled around and snatched her skirts out of danger. The lad fled on an instant, scrambled up high on the board fence, and disappeared over it. From The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. You don't know about me without you. Have you read a book by the name of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer? But that ain't no matter. The book was made by Mr. Mark Twain, and he told the truth, mainly. There were things in which he stretched, but mainly he told the truth. That is nothing. I never seen anybody but lied one time or another. Without it was Aunt Polly, or the widow, or maybe Mary. Aunt Polly, Tom's Aunt Polly, she is, and Mary, and the widow Douglas, and all I told about in that book, which is mostly a true book, with some stretchers, as I said before. Now the way the book winds up is this. Tom and me found the money that the robbers hid in the cave, and it made us rich. We got $6,000 apiece, all gold, and it was awful sight of money when it was all piled up. Well, Judge Thatcher, he took it and put it out in interest, and it fetched us $1 a day apiece all the year round, more than a body could tell what to do with. The widow Douglas, she took me for her son and allowed me she would civilize me, but it was rough living in the house all the time, considering how dismal, regular, and decent the widow was in all of her ways. And so when I couldn't stand it no longer, I lit out. I got into my old rags and my sugar hogshead again, and was free and satisfied. But Tom Sawyer, he hunted me up and said he was going to start a band of robbers, and if I might join, I would go back to the widow and he would be respectable. So I went back. In the excerpt from The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, it seems as if the story is told by an outside narrator, making it third-person point of view. From this excerpt, it was not clear whether the story is told from the omniscient or limited viewpoint. However, since the novel is about Tom Sawyer, it would make sense that the narrator is to show mainly his perspective. The narrator allows us to see characteristics of both Tom and his Aunt Polly. We see right away that Aunt Polly is strict, and as she is yelling at Tom in the beginning of the story. The narrator reveals Tom's mischievous nature as Tom tricks his aunt to avoid a whipping. We see an excerpt from the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn that the narrator uses the pronoun I to refer to himself. Huckleberry Finn is the narrator, and he tells the story in the first-person point of view, allowing us to see the story from his perspective. He even relates his side of the story to what is told in the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. The narration in this story shows Huck's thoughts and personality in his own words. It's almost as if we can hear Huck speaking as he narrates the story. Notice that the story is told with casual, personal tone, or attitude, and the Adventure of Tom Sawyer is narrated with a more formal tone. So we see that a story's point of view not only decides how much information is revealed, but it also reveals the attitude of or personality of the narrator. Language and word choice. Each writer has his or own unique manner of expression, style, or voice. Is the way the author uses language and word choice to express his or her ideas in writing. When you read the excerpt from The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, you notice the author gave the narrator a certain voice in the story. The narrator, Huckleberry Finn, uses slang words and expressions that are unique to his character and display his personality. Authors use language to shape their writing and make it uniquely their own. We will look at two aspects of language and that add interest and meaning to writing: figurative language and sensory language. Figurative language includes words and expressions that are not meant to be taken literally. This type of language involves a comparison, describing one thing in terms of another. Authors use figurative language to make their writing more interesting. An example of figurative language can be found in The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. The narrator says, referring to Aunt Polly's glasses, she could have seen through a pair of stove lids just as well, implying that the glasses were only for style and did nothing to correct her vision. Another example occurs when the narrator remarked that Aunt Polly spoke loud enough for the furniture to hear, giving the furniture the quality of hearing. In this figure of speech, the furniture is compared with something that is alive and has the ability to hear. Authors use imaginary details that appeal to the senses of smell, sight, hearing, taste, and touch, to make their own writing come alive. These images or word pictures give the reader a mental picture of what the author is describing. The following passage is an excerpt from Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. Notice the vivid imagery that the author uses to describe a seaman in the opening chapter. Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. I remember him as if it were yesterday, as he came plodding into the inn door, his sea chest following behind him in a hand barrel, tall, strong, heavy, nut-brown man, his tarry pigtail falling over the shoulder of his soiled blue coat, and his hands ragged and scarred, with black broken nails and a saber cut across one cheek, a dirty, livid white. I remember him looking around the corner and whistling to himself, and as he did so, and then breaking out into the old sea song that he sang often afterwards. 15 men on a dead man's chest, yo-ho-ho, and a bottle of rum. And the high old tottering voice that seemed to have been tuned and broken in at the capstan bars. Then he rapped the door with a bit of stick like a handspike that he carried, and when my father appeared, he called roughly for a glass of rum. This, when it was brought to him, he drank slowly, like a connoisseur, lingering on the taste and still looking about him at the cliffs and up at our signboard. As you read the description of this man, you can picture his appearance in your mind. Images such as black as broken nails give you a definite picture that you can associate with this man. When writers use vibrant sensory language or imagery, they allow the reader to have a much clearer picture of the people, places, or objects they describe. Read the excerpt from Call of the Wild, then answer the following questions. Call of the Wild by Jack London. Buck did not read the newspapers, or he would have known that the trouble was brewing, not alone for himself, but for every Tidewater dog, strong of muscle and with warm, long hair from Puget Sound to San Diego. Because men groping the Arctic darkness had found a yellow metal, and because steamship and transportation companies were booming the find, thousands of men were rushing into the Northland. These men wanted dogs, and the dogs they wanted were heavy dogs, with strong muscles, by which toil and furry coats to protect them from the frost. Buck lived at a big house in the sun-kissed Santa Clara Valley, located in Northern California. Judge Miller's place, it was called, stood back from the road, half hidden among the trees, through which the glimpses could be caught of the wide, cool veranda that ran around all four of its sides. The house was approached by a graveled driveways, which wound up about through the winding spread lawns underneath and under the interlacing boughs of tall poplars. At the rear, things were on even more spacious scale than at the front. There were great stables, there were a dozen grooms and boys held forth, rows of vine-laden servants, cottages, and endless and orderly array of outhouses. Long grape arbors, green pastures, orchards, and berry patches. There was the plumping plant for the artesian well, and the big cement tank where Judge Miller's boys took their morning plunge and kept cool in the hot afternoon. And then you can answer these questions down below that talk about the story. All right, and that's it for your lesson 3. Thanks for sticking around. It was a long lesson, but it's good to go. You're good to go. You're doing an amazing job. So proud of you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.